Awesome. We're a little early, but it's a morning stream, so we're allowed to be a bit chipper.
It's not morning for me.
It's okay, it's noon for me, I guess. So it's technically still morning. But compared to what we usually stream at 5 my time, so this is much more morning-like for me.
Yep.
But anyways, hello everybody that's here already, early birds. Welcome to I think this is technically our December live stream, because it was like on Christmas or something, and so we postponed it, and then it was like December or January 2nd, so we postponed it again.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't really want to do a live stream on January 2nd, so.
That's fair. I didn't.
And now we are here, and it is January 9th. I think we even have one scheduled for later in January, which I don't know, might do. We'll see. So hello everybody, welcome to 2025. First off, Happy New Year. That number feels too big to me. I don't know why, but 2025.
We're a quarter away through the century.
Yeah. That doesn't feel right. Because like in another 25 years, it'll be 2050. And that doesn't feel right either.
And then we'll basically be Star Trek.
Exactly. We better have all that technology.
Flying cars and spaceships.
Yeah, or when did Back to the Future 3? No, 2 is the one in the future. When did Back to the Future 2 take place? 2019, right?
What?
Because 3 was the one where they like went to the Old West or something.
Yeah.
And it came out in 79, I think.
I don't actually remember. Back to the Future 2.
No. Was it an 80s movie or a 70s movie? I actually don't remember. I think
2015.
That was in 2015, so it came out 85. 30 years in the future. And the other one was 1955. Was that number 3? I don't really remember. It's been a while since I've seen those movies.
Yeah. Where is my hoverboard?
Make like a tree and get out of here!
That's number 1.
Anyways, so hi Ethan, how are you?
I'm good. I'm on the East Coast. It's very cold here.
It is not cold here. It is a lovely 20 degrees outside, Celsius, real temperature.
Real temperature.
Yeah, real number.
It is a lovely -4 degrees here, Celsius.
That's very cold.
It's not even the coldest that I've had this week. It's actually balmy compared to earlier this week.
We love a good balmy -4. And you didn't go skiing this week. You said that you.
No, I went skiing last week.
How was that?
It was okay. It was very cold, and the snow was very icy. So not great, but I'm looking forward. I'm going to Colorado in February, and that's gonna be like my opportunity to do real skiing and with lots of powder and whatnot, assuming there's any snow, which I hope there is.
Cool.
You can never really tell.
That should be fun.
I'm looking forward to it, yeah.
I haven't gone skiing in a very long time. I was kind of traumatized because my dad loves to ski. So I was like an 8-year-old. He'd be like, we'd go skiing together, and he'd want to stay outside and ski for 8 to 10 hours.
Yeah.
So when we're going to the mountain, we're going to go ski all day.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
we got to get our money's worth.
I am 10 years old. I want to go inside and have hot chocolate, please.
Yes.
So,
yeah, it's a little too young for that. I have a season pass this year, so I don't need to like make the most of every single day.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I hope that you do get to go skiing and get some lovely powder and get to enjoy it.
Oh, if I don't, then it's going to be a big problem.
Terrible. Somebody in the chat has a question here. They ask, are we going to cover MP Vacious, which is an add-on to MPV Player, which is a media player? Probably not, honestly. I have it set up, but I have no idea how I did it. It's kind of a pain to do, and it is honestly just better to use ASB Player in the browser, and you can use your own media files that way. I just find it way easier to use, and ASB Player is much, much easier to install. Actually, I just set up my German sentence mining the other day, and now that Yomitan has a really easy, it's in the App Store. It's got an easy like 2-click installer for the languages, so it's really easy to set up. And ASP Player is also in the App Store now or Chrome Store. So like, I could open a brand new browser and get sentence mining set up in like 5 minutes. It's so easy now, which is great. So I just don't think there's a reason to cover MPVacious. It's just a much larger pain to get set up, and I honestly do not remember. I just copied over my setup from my other computer, and it still works. I'm like, all right, I'm not going to touch it. I don't know. I don't even use it though. So no, sorry, I'm probably not going to make anything with it.
Yeah, I mean, MPVacious has been around for a long time. So if you can't already find tutorials for it, we're probably not going to be the ones making them.
It was also just such a pain.
Yeah.
It took me so long to do, and that's why I never touched it and don't remember.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Oh, good. Fellow human is finally here. We can start. Do you want to get into some questions? Or do you want to
Sure. Or
chat about something else? Do you have any ideas that are floating around in your head? About language learning?
Ideas.
Refold update? You want to talk about the app for a second?
Sure, app's great. I don't even know what's happened. I looked yesterday and it was like, oh, we just passed 1,000. And I looked this morning, like, oh, we're at 1,100.
Users.
So, root users.
Yeah.
Of people who have not just installed it, but actually done something with it.
That's cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, you can get the app now if you want.
It's true.
We have like the actual launch inviting you to use it video coming out later today. And I'm also sending out to the rest of the waitlist people that people wanted a specific invite. But if you're seeing this, there's 20 of you here. Hello to the 20 of you watching.
Hey,
If
20.
you're seeing this, you can get the app right now. You can become user 1,101 or whatever.
No, there's a bunch more users than that just like didn't do anything with it. So.
Okay. Do we get?
Yeah, it's one of those weird things where
numbers?
like the app is, it's useful if you are about to start like actually sitting down to study, but if you're not right about to start studying, there's nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Right? It's only meant for when you are studying. So like just installing the app, there's no reason to use it. You have to like wait till you're actually like going to do something. So we got to address that onboarding aspect, but it
Yeah, I had it for months, just like sitting on my phone before I actually even put something in there for real.
Yeah, well, you had you were using Toggle, so it makes sense
Right.
that you weren't going
Yeah.
to switch over automatically. But we've got about 600 people using it regularly.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And JD asks how come they didn't know that there was an app.
Because
And
we have not done a good job of advertising it. Also because it's not out yet, technically.
yeah, but that's the big thing. Right? We haven't really tried to get the word just to literally everybody that could possibly hear about it. But also, like the places that we do talk about it are on our email list, in the newsletters. We do a couple of announcements about it in different places.
It's also
Right.
integrated into our new listening course. So
Yeah.
you track all the things you do, all the homeworks, all of the time you spend with all of our listening exercises. You can track all of that in the app. So anyone who's come in through that route definitely knows about it.
So hopefully more people hear about it as we start to get it more and more public. But something I've also noticed as working in marketing is that there's also kind of like an upper limit of the amount of people that you can that know about you that you can get the word out to. Because like some people will just close an email they don't read it, or they just won't see things, or they'll have like an ad blocker or whatever it is, like just to miss things, which is very normal. I miss tons of things. I'm like, how come I didn't know about that? It's like, we tried. It's kind of your fault. It's like, yeah, I didn't read any of your emails or anything. So
Yeah.
there's like an upper limit, but
I think it also just takes a lot of like repeated announcements before it lands in somebody's mind. So
yeah, like if you see some random things like, oh, this person built an app, and you're like, wait, I just heard app, I don't actually know whose it is, or things like that are common.
The other thing is we've been deliberately slow rolling it because we're like, things are going to start breaking when people come in. So like Ben pointed out yesterday, they're like, oh, our community feed isn't loading. And I noticed the same thing today. I was like, oh, got to go figure out what that's being caused by. I assume because there's just too many people now.
Um, Speaking of apps, Dion asks if we've talked about Fluio yet. Because Fluio came out. I don't know if you saw that.
We haven't talked about it publicly.
No. Um, I've been talking a little bit because both Mr. Salas and Lamont texted me about it.
Yep.
Um, and basically, it's a kind of buggy, weird Duolingo clone that isn't a great video game. Sort of what it was
Yeah.
expected to be.
Wow, I didn't realize that they got up to 1.2 mil in their Kickstarter.
That's pretty good. I mean, I saw that I did see that his video came out. It was like he spent 3 million. That's what the title says. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's when you look at the language learning industry, there's a couple different approaches. There's the Duolingo approach, which is we're just going to turn language learning into a video game. There's the Babbel approach, which is we're going to take the traditional classroom and just make it digital. And there's more our approach, which is media immersion. So focusing on just consuming native media. And now there's this whole new area of AI tutors and AI language partners.
There's also the speak early, speak a lot camp, which isn't
Yeah,
really, it was a
yeah. So
little bit
that's like
different.
yeah, that's true. And I would put sort of like the Tandem and Hello Talk speaking communities in that group. And so I'd say Fluio is an attempt at the first one, which is turning language learning into a video game. It's it's primarily a video game. It just also you teach language as in order to play the game.
I watched Mr. Salas's review of it,
Hmm.
and it seems to actually more just be like flashcards and language learning stuff, and the
Oh,
game is almost secondary but presented as primary.
okay.
Because like the game part is not very fun and not very helpful, and then there's like a couple of pieces that are like basically just an Anki clone, or basically just like these other typical language learning tools that
Yeah.
are like fine, but they're also not a video game. They're just language learning tools that exist.
That's a
So
bummer. I was actually kind of hoping they would do the language learning because they had that whole like I think there was like a battle scene where you had to fight
yeah,
somebody using language ability.
like Pokemon, like that's in
Yeah.
there, but it's like click on what word this is. These
Yeah.
are just more flashcards. So.
Yes.
Um, and I forget some. I saw a conversation somewhere where somebody brought up like the actual like language learning video games that some people are trying to make. There's one called like I'm not gonna go through with the name, like Verb Hero or something like that, where it's a sort of an RPG that actually does try to like introduce you to vocab and that kind of thing, and does integrate much better real language learning with real game like stuff.
Hmm.
But it also seems like such a hard thing to solve,
Yeah.
to make like an actual video game that is language learning.
Yeah. I talked to a founder a couple of years ago who was working on like it was like a virtual travel game where you had to like navigate around a city using the language. And again, that was just like it just seems like a lot of extra effort to learn not that much stuff.
Exactly.
Um, so I think the challenge with a lot of these video game aspects is that they crowd out a lot of the language learning, um, which may be fine if it keeps people more engaged. But I think it remains to be seen whether I've not seen anyone who's been able to balance the two, where
Mm-hmm.
it both is an efficient use of time and is entertaining and fun. I haven't really seen anything, and I was kind of hoping Fluyo would do that, but based on at least the initial information that I've gotten about it, I don't think that it's done it yet.
Yeah, we'll see.
So
Hopefully they are able to adapt and see what people like and that sort of thing.
yeah.
But continuing the video game conversation, there was a conversation in Refold General a while ago, like the main Refold Discord server, which you can join, refold.link/join, about like video games and how to make them. Oh, here it is. It's called the Rocket Boy Games. Was the
Hmm.
game that they're talking about, like an adventure sort of point and click adventure game, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we got on the topic of just sort of talking about video games, and somebody brought up the idea of like a video game console or a way to play ideally any game that kind of integrates like a meta layer stuff into it, where you can look up words or
Sure.
learn from it. And that sounds cool. But it also sounds like such a massive problem and like thing to do that would just be so difficult to make well that it almost sounds impossible to me.
Yeah, I mean, the current solution for that is to have a screen recorder
Right.
that you just play whatever game on your computer and you just put this, it's essentially a meta layer on top of that and you get these extra tools, but it's just on top of your whole screen. It's not
Right.
specifically on the game. It allows you to OCR text and look it up that way. It's a
And
little
that,
clunky,
oh,
but
yeah, it's a little clunky. And then the other thing that I kind of worry about with that is how language dense games really are. Like, is
most
it
of them are
really,
not very language dense, but some of them are have a good amount of language in them.
yeah, sort of visual novels or like reading heavy RPGs and that kind of thing. But like video games are also traditionally, or not traditionally, like for many years have been a way that especially non-native English speakers just learn English somehow on accident because they get really into nerd culture and video games online, and they just have to pick up English or else they aren't going to be able to be part of this thing that they enjoy and love,
Yeah.
right? So like I think that is almost the more interesting side of video games and language
Mhm.
learning to me because it's worked for a ton of people. I've met many people that speak really, really good English, and you're just like, oh, how did you learn? They're like, I'm just a massive nerd, and there weren't, uh, they don't print magic cards in my language, or all of the Zelda forums are in English, or I
Yeah.
played Minecraft with Americans all day. Like things like that that actually do work very well and effectively. And people are like, I don't know how I learned English. I just speak it better than everybody I've ever met in my entire life,
Yeah.
in real life, in person. Like,
I mean, it just goes to show that like the obsession aspect is more important than the actual language, any of the language learning tools.
exactly.
It's more get obsessed with the thing that is in the target language, make that a huge part of your life, a huge part of your interests, and you will naturally acquire the language through that process,
Mm-hmm.
whether you want to or not, as long as you stay obsessed and engaged with it.
Precisely. So something that like goes around gaming culture and gets people connected, or I don't know, normalizes crosstalk within gaming or something like that. I feel like would be a lot more effective even than a perfect meta layer for video games or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, maybe you do like Minecraft servers that are language specific. So you could have
I
like a
I don't know if you
crosstalk server.
that was a huge thing actually on Spanish and English YouTube
Hmm.
uh, last year. Maybe it's still going, but there was a big Mexican and American like I think he's half half streamer that like started a big old thing with humongous streamers. They get like 20,000 viewers per stream or whatever, and it was like kind of normal for people to essentially do crosstalk and then like in game it would like translate things above it and it was not something that I'd seen before, but like just the fact that some of the biggest streamers I in Spanish that I follow or suddenly like doing these things with like English speakers. It's like that's cool.
Hmm.
So maybe more of that. I wonder actually, it'd be so cool to know the effect that had on people's interest, especially because it's sort of targeted to a younger audience. Like their interest in Spanish, their interest in English in a less scholarly way.
Hmm.
Anywho,
Yeah.
we do have some real questions. There's more from the chat though.
Yeah.
So let's
Let's do some chat. Yeah.
All right. Screw the predefined questions. All right.
Hey, the people who showed up are like giving us their time, so we might as well treat
Yeah.
them right.
Hello, everybody. Okay. Juan asks, how can I increase how can I activate my passive vocabulary? I know a lot of words, but they don't come to me naturally when I try to speak.
Yeah. A lot of strategies on this. We actually we need to do more work to improve our own understanding of how this process works. Um, we have a mental model for it. We've definitely ideated on a lot of different options, but sitting down and really figuring out what to do in what order is a project that is on our list to do. But we had this model where we talk about the comfort of speaking
Mm-hmm.
versus the accuracy of speaking, versus how comprehensive you can speak, like the how many things you can talk about. And then I always remember what the last A was.
Automaticity.
Automaticity. It's how like um, can you do it without thinking? And so in terms of activating your passive language as it currently exists, we tend to recommend comfort first before trying to have a huge amount of knowledge or a huge amount of things that you can talk about, really focusing in and just spending a lot of time speaking without worrying too much about the accuracy and whether you're using the right words, whether you're phrasing things properly. Just get into a rhythm of speaking, because I've talked about this on previous streams, and I think a lot of other people have faced this before, where there is a build-up time where you have to convert and stop your native language brain from spitting words into your mouth, putting words or words into your mouth, and switch over to the target language. And that takes time, and it takes practice to do that. And once you switch over, it's much easier. But if you're going, like in my case, going from English to Spanish, if I'm in English mode and I'm trying to speak Spanish, I'm constantly being interrupted by my English brain. And learning how to turn that off and turn on Spanish and get comfortable with that and activate enough of the language that you can use it on a regular basis is sort of the first step towards being able to activate the rest of what you have available. And then being able to do it at a really high level of accuracy, really high level of correctness, so that it sounds native. So I would say the first thing that I would target is spend a lot of time speaking. Try and surround yourself like completely in the language as much as possible. Speak as much as you can. We recommend around 50 hours of output, and really just focus on the time. Don't worry too much about corrections or the type of activities you're doing. Just time is the biggest factor. And then the other aspect is learning to produce the language. So a lot of our decks are focused on recognition and comprehension. So you go from the target language to your native language, or to just an understanding of that. Now you got to flip it, go the other way. And the first step is, can you remember what the word was quickly? But then the next is, can you actually use it in a sentence? Can you use it in conversation? So one of the games that I sort of played with myself, sorry, but I'm dragging on, but one of the games that I was playing with myself for a while is I took our Spanish deck and I inverted it so that the English is on the front. I also filtered out all the words that I felt very confident with. And now what I do is every word that comes up, I have to like create a sentence about it. And I try to either do a sentence or a paragraph using that word. And then for the next 10 words, try and use all of them in the same series of thoughts. So it ends up sort of being like one story or one essay that uses all the words that came up. So you could do something similar. Go ahead, Ben.
I was going to say that's the big thing I think for activating once you are comfortable is you have to just use the words.
Yeah.
They're not going to come up without ever having used them before. And I think a really good example is how you learn words from Anki and that kind of thing, which actually goes into another question here in chat, is where when you memorize the word from Anki, that does not mean that you're going to understand it like when you see something. But once you do see it and you go, oh right, I know that and I understand it, then it starts to go deeper into your subconscious and you understand it more and more easily. But you're not just going to understand a word for the first time that you just have never seen and there's no context, and like you have to get something there first. And so the sort of the same thing applies, where even if you know it, you can understand it, you might not have ever used it before, and your brain just needs some practice with it. And so making sure that you do touch all of those words and force yourself to use them, like Ethan said, forcing yourself through flashcards or through specific context or specific conversations with teachers, or even just writing yourself a sticky note saying, use these words today, can really help to take those words from being annoying things that get blocked when you're trying to speak to just being regular words you use all the time.
Cool. Thanks for the question.
All right, let's go into one here from the pre-made questions. And they ask, how do I learn endangered languages with Refold? And we've done some similar questions on this before, but I think we can go through it pretty quickly. And so they're basically saying, what are your recommendations for incorporating traditional learning materials with more immersion style Refold learning? Because they're learning Irish, which is an endangered language with only 20 to 40K speakers. And Ireland is trying to preserve it by mandating education for school-age kids some in Irish, I think, if I'm understanding what they said correctly. And on the flip side, there is some native content and media in Irish, but it's very limited. And so they're saying that it seems very silly to fully discount traditional language learning methods because things are so constricted, like this native content is constricted.
Totally.
And you absolutely can integrate both sort of more traditional classroom learning and just immersion stuff, which actually is going to make the traditional classroom way more effective. And especially that's like your main way to get contact with the language. It is a form of input. It's just a lot slower than other like more input dense methods where you are understanding a lot more of the language. And so you absolutely can get input, especially if the traditional classes are taught in the language. That's actually pretty solid in my opinion. And you basically have to be more creative and spend enough time with the language and try to feel it and understand it in a way that a speaker would, like a native speaker might, rather than just relying on that more traditional math-based approach, and try to connect with it more. If you can, find actual native speakers, do crosstalk, and that sort of thing. It's definitely a lot harder than if there's a language with a ton of content and stuff available, but it's absolutely doable. And if you find some interesting sources and just go down that route, you can absolutely make really good progress and be quite successful in helping to not necessarily revive the language, but to help at least revitalize the efforts and be a part of unendangering the language. I don't know if that's a phrase.
Bringing it back.
Bringing it back.
I would say that I think we should define what we mean by traditional language learning methods, because traditional, meaning like what you see in a classroom most often, I would say focuses on two things. One of which is a grammar focused or a grammar lens, learning language through grammar as the primary topic that you discuss in your classrooms. And then practicing that by using the grammar. And then I would say the other aspect of traditional classrooms is that they create a very narrow focus of what you are learning. And that narrow focus often does not map to the real language. So I would say those are the two main issues of traditional, or the main criteria of what I would consider traditional language learning, of grammar focus and niche or narrow non-native portion of the language that you're studying. But there's plenty of other things about traditional learning that are totally fine. You learn vocabulary in a traditional setting. That's important. You need to do that regardless of which direction you're going. You have access to a teacher who is speaking the language. That's great. I would even go so far as to say that like practicing the language in a classroom is good. It's just that you need to supplement it with exposure to the real language, because typically what they show you in a classroom is this artificially simplified version of the language. So that is why we emphasize media immersion, because you want to see what the language is actually, how it's actually spoken. And we emphasize vocabulary as the primary obstacle, because that is what is necessary to understand most of, that's the bulk of the challenge of understanding native media. Now, with an endangered language, I'm pretty sure that there's a sizable number of books that have been written in Irish Gaelic, and I'm sure that there are several YouTube channels dedicated to it. So I don't think that there's a lack of content. There's obviously way less than the popular languages. So I think that the challenge is actually going to be finding content that's interesting to you. Because if you don't care if it's interesting or not, and you're ready to immerse in whatever they provide you, I imagine that there is more content out there in Irish Gaelic than you can possibly consume in your life. It's just, it may not be the kind of thing that you're interested in. Because of the endangered languages, it is one of the more popular from a modern content creation standpoint.
Yeah, I think that's a good overview, and hopefully that's helpful to you. I forgot to read the name of the person who asked the question, but thank you for your question.
Yeah. I just want to add
Oh,
one more thing of how you can use a traditional environment. I think a traditional environment can absolutely reinforce the things that you learn through immersion. Um,
yeah.
yeah, like, as you're learning things from the book, you use that as a way to acquire and solidify vocabulary and acquire and solidify the grammar knowledge. And then whatever you practice in your traditional classroom gets reinforced by what you're learning outside the classroom.
Hmm. Hopefully creates a loop.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a sort of related question here from three in the chat asking about making Anki decks sort of in the Refold style for an indigenous language or an endangered language,
Hmm.
and asking sort of a bit about our process. And Anki decks really aren't that difficult. There's just a lot of like filtering and planning and organization that has to be done for it to be high quality. Because a lot of the decks on Anki Web are functional. Like they have a front and a back, but they're maybe not. They don't have good sentences. They don't have good orders. They don't have good audio. There's so many little things that can go wrong, and
Or they've
so
just chosen bad words, like words
yeah,
that are just not useful.
totally. And so if you do all of the little parts of an Anki deck right, and you just basically make a list of what you want your Anki deck to have, and you think about, okay, how can I do the best at this? That's going to end up creating a very solid Anki deck. In terms of the actual like technology of doing it, it's basically just a spreadsheet and the importing and figuring out how Anki works, which is way too much to go into for in a live stream. Um, but if you can pick the words really well, make decent example sentences, get good audio, translations, make it in a decent order. That's really all you need, right? It's probably like
Yeah,
putting something
I
together.
would definitely say that the content of an Anki deck is the hard part.
Yeah,
Um, Building the Anki deck itself, there's obviously a formatting standpoint. So like we have a you can just like steal our formatting, and
yeah, I've got that in. I think in how to make Anki work for you or something like that. I have a
yeah, we
video
have
where
like an
it's like,
example card
yeah,
for it. So you can just steal our formatting. We don't mind it at all. Um, the but the content curation is the hard part, and we've developed a lot of processes around it because we've done it like 30 plus times now.
and
But
it's still hard.
it's still annoying. It's just a lot of steps and a lot of people are always like, oh, there's this one mistake in this one card, and it's like there's 5,000 pieces of information in that deck. I'm surprised that you've only found one.
I did the German deck, and something that really bothers me is that most of the definitions are like have a dash in it, or no, it's colon. But some of them have a dash before the words, and I'm like, why is there a dash there? Things like that. I mean, that's obviously irrelevant to the actual language
Yeah,
content,
yeah.
but it bothers me. Um, so yeah, I don't know. I don't really have a great answer for how to make an Anki deck, but if you just keep going towards it and keep asking yourself, how do I make this more useful? How do I make this more engaging? I think you'll get to something that's really cool. Especially if you can work with native speakers to get good audio, that is just a game changer.
Yeah. I would say that is the most uh, the rarest part. Like it's very rare for Anki decks to have native audio in the free Anki web. Um,
And the ones that do have it are usually like Forvo audio,
yeah,
which is mid at best.
yeah.
So
But yeah, content curation is the what I would consider personally the most tedious and difficult part of the process, and the one that most people don't do, which is why
exactly.
the quality of Anki decks online are usually not great.
Thank you for the question three. Let's go to another one in from the prepped ones. How do I maintain a language? If you're learning multiple languages or have learned a language before and are now learning another one, how do you keep yourself from forgetting the previous one? How many hours of immersion in the old language did you do, and does it depend on your level in that language?
I would say it depends on what you mean by maintain. If it's a question of I want to be able to continue to use this while I am learning another language, versus when I come back to this in a year, I don't want to have lost too much. I think those are two different definitions of maintain. So um, the second one is easier to answer. Once you've acquired a language and gotten to a pretty good level, it's kind of with you for life. you'll always have some of that, and it can always be reacquired relatively easily.
Yeah, to interrupt there, both Mr. Solis and I have learned German in the past to a relatively high-ish level, and we left it for 5 to 6 years, and we're doing it sort of a little challenge together, coming back to learning German again. I can listen to Harry Potter and watch TV shows and everything very easily. It's like I it's almost like my speaking is way worse. I haven't even tried yet, but like understanding is basically at the same level that I was 6 years ago, and probably maybe even better now that I have all these tools and techniques from Refold.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get to a high enough level, absolutely. I have heard that if you only get to like basics or A2 ish, you can slide back and have to start back from zero.
Yeah.
But if you do hit a certain threshold, which seems to be around B1, B2 ish for whatever that is, like then it's with you. Then you don't really fully forget anything.
Yeah. I think if you reach the level where you can actually understand a TV show or a podcast, you kind of have that skill for life.
You've refolded certain parts of your wrinkly brain,
Yeah.
and they're not going to unfold.
Yeah, those creases are there permanently. But it does take a little bit of time. It can't. It's not like you jump back into it and on day one you're right back to where you were.
Yeah.
It's just within a week or two you can get back up to where you were.
Yeah, next week I'm going to start outputting and see how long it takes me to get back to that. I'm very curious because I have not even tried to speak German in 7 years or something.
Yeah. And then the other question, which is, how do you maintain it in such a way where you are actually maintaining the ability to speak it on a regular basis? Requires you to speak it on a regular basis or to understand it or use it on a regular basis. Now, Ben does this in his day-to-day life because he moved to Mexico and is surrounded by Spanish and uses it constantly. So there's no, like, Ben, you don't have to do any maintenance of your Spanish. It's just part of your life.
Yeah, a bunch of my friends only speak Spanish. A bunch of my books are in Spanish. Like a lot of my accounts are just logged in Spanish automatically. It's just there. I don't know.
Yeah. So having an opportunity where you're engaging with the language on a regular basis as just part of your normal everyday life is the way to maintain it. Trying to continue to study it alongside, I find that just kind of distracts from the other language you're trying to study, unless you enjoy it. But if it's something where you just enjoy watching a TV show or enjoy reading a book or enjoy reading a podcast in the language you're trying to maintain, that will help you maintain the language. You're not going to improve very much. Might solidify a few things, but you're generally not going to improve, but you will maintain it. And it's such a low level of effort that it is more relaxing or enjoyable than the study part of the process.
So yeah, that last part of your question is the most important, that if you have a certain level in the language, it's so much easier to maintain.
Yeah.
If you've done 4 weeks of study of Japanese, maintaining that 4 weeks is going to be really hard because that's nothing.
There's nothing to maintain.
If you've learned for a decade and you want to spend a year on French, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
Thank you for the question. Again, I didn't look at who sent it, and I already dismissed it. Sorry.
Well, it's gone.
We had another question here from Leo McCulloch, something like that, asking about my Czech grammar acquisition. And since I'm literally like writing the next Czech update video, I want to talk about this for a second. Because they ask about all the case endings. Because in Slavic languages, as I've said before, the ways that nouns change in all these contexts is a pain. It's very difficult. And in the sense of like, I've acquired pretty much everything for comprehension purposes. If I hear a sentence that powerfully uses these endings, like to make specific meanings, there we go, I understand just fine. I realize, yes, that is XYZ in the sixth case. That is XYZ in the second case. That is just what it means. However, when I go to speak, I have a lot of over-regularization. Because while there are 3.5 genders in Czech, there are also several different declension patterns which sort of overlap, which means that woman and chairman, which are different genders, have the same-ish declension pattern. And so it's very, like, I can maybe pick up on, like, oh, this is that declension pattern. I could not tell you if it was masculine or feminine or whatever, or the other way around. We're like, okay, this is obviously a neuter noun. Don't know which declension pattern it's supposed to follow, or whatever it is. And when I'm speaking, I'll just over-regularize, which I've seen is, which is very common with young kids as well, right? So like, what's a past? Like runned, right? I run fast. That's an over-regularization because they picked up the thing of, okay, past is ed, I run fast. And then eventually they'll go correct it to be I ran fast. So over-regularization is where you pick up on these things that should be a different way and say it the way that is more logical based on the rules and patterns of the language. And so I'm picking things up better slowly, and what I'm actually doing now is to start just doing sentence breakdowns where I'm looking at it and going, okay, I know this word, what pattern is it, what gender is it, why is it like that, and just really trying to think about it more, because it won't just happen in the next 20 hours of speaking. You need probably on the order of magnitude of tens of thousands of hours of exposure in order just to use all these very complex patterns naturally. And so I'm adding a section of more conscious study. I'm still not just doing like the full-on declension chart memorization, since I don't want to do a table lookup in my head when I'm speaking, because that's just slow. But I want to familiarize myself more with context and words that I know to be able to use them in the less regular scenarios, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question. It's not... Well, I'm still trying to figure out the best way, try and shit, see what works, because it's hard. But I wish you best of luck with your Slavic language. Anything to add, Ethan, to my rant?
No, all you, man. I don't know what you're talking about.
Womp, 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 womp. Here's another good question. Oops. Okay, I'm reading the name for who did this, but it's in Japanese or Chinese, so I don't know how to say it, sorry. But thank you for your question. And they say, I can't focus during intensive immersion. Sometimes I feel when trying to do intensively immerse, I find myself free-flowing, especially if it's not reading-based. Is this normal?
So if it's not reading-based, then...
More intensive listening.
Yeah, intensive listening. I'd say that the primary factor is tooling. Does your tooling enable the intensive listening? So do you have auto pause on? Are you giving yourself are you requiring yourself to actually like re-listen to things, really work hard to understand them? In terms of not focusing, if you say that you are going into a free flow mindset, that's not focusing per se. It's just letting things.
Because I sometimes do this too, where I'll realize like I listened to a sentence and I watched what happened, and I'm pretty sure I know generally what they said because they had some emotion in their voice, but I could not even say with any amount of confidence that I know what that sentence was. I didn't even try. Right? Where like I got the vibe, which is what I would do in free flow, but I did not try to hear the words. I did not try to see if there was a word that I didn't know that I could look up. I didn't try any of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's more what they're referring to.
Okay. So this is a difference in people. So some people love intensive immersion, some people hate it. I personally am one who loves it, where I want to understand. It really annoys me when I can't understand or when I miss something or I don't know why something is said. So I get a little obsessive about trying to understand why. I'm not sure which camp you fall into, Ben. Are you a more intensive or a more free flow?
I really like doing intensive immersion, but I don't really get bothered in that way.
Yeah.
Where like if I do find something, I'm pretty sure it means probably the gist of this. And that's
Sure.
fine for me.
Yeah. So I think it is completely reasonable to start with a lower level of intensive whatever, listening or reading, and build up over time. Get used to that, build that habit, build that muscle. So if you can really only do like 5 or 10 minutes of it at a time without losing focus or hating it, then only do 5 or 10 minutes at a time. That's fine. Let's say you're spending 2 hours studying. Maybe you do 10 minutes of intensive and then 20 minutes of free flow, and then just alternate that for the full 2 hour block. Intensive, based on its name, it's an intensive activity. It can really drain you of your energy and of your focus. So taking frequent breaks can help with that. There are people who try and sit down and just bang their head against something, and it just doesn't work if you do it for too long. You will get headaches. It will not be a pleasant experience until you get to a level where there are so few words that you need to look up that intensive is not that different from free flow.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at with my German, which is nice. Like just jumping into something where it's like, oh, great, I could just do a 40-minute TV show. It takes me 45 or 50 minutes to watch intensively, just because I know most things.
Oh wow, that's great.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Yeah, that must have been a very pleasant experience, just like coming back up to speed that quickly.
Yeah, it's especially when you're after learning Czech, which is significantly more different and harder than German, and like there's so many more cognates. When it's like, yeah, that's that word. That's what we say in English. It's the same thing. It just doesn't happen in Czech the same. It's very rewarding.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Yeah, but all of that is to say is if you find that your focus is struggling after just a little bit, then only do it for a little bit, then take a break. You don't have to force yourself to do something, but you should be constantly working towards it and trying to build up your endurance, your tolerance to it. Yeah, over time.
That's exactly what I wanted to say there. Is like it's also a skill. You will get better at doing intensive immersion the more you do it.
Yeah.
So give yourself permission to not be amazing at it the first time.
Yeah.
We got a question here in the chat from Lexa, which I made a thing for. And they say that I don't know what language I want to learn. I'm leaning towards Swedish, but I've got a lot of languages I might be interested in. How would you go about trying a language out? How long would you give each one, etc.? And so a lot of people ask, what language should I learn? And at the end of the day, that's a very personal decision. So we're not gonna like answer German here. That's like, I think that question is interesting because they ask like, how do you test languages out? How do you see which one you like? That sort of thing. Any general tips for starting the language learning process, especially if you're new to immersion learning or Refold? I think it's an interesting question to ask.
Yeah, so if you don't really have any idea of which one to learn, then try a bunch out. And honestly, Duolingo is great for this. If you just want to like see a little bit of a bunch of different languages, you can just do that on Duolingo and just try a bunch of different languages. Because you're not actually trying to use Duolingo as a tool for learning. You're using it as a tool for exposing yourself to a bunch of different languages. So what did Lamont do? He did like 7 languages in 6 months or something?
Something like that. And I think he specifically used story learning because he works with them and he's got access to everything.
Right.
But so like something like that where you can get exposure to a bunch of different languages. I actually recommend, we have this, we redid the site a little bit and we've got this section that has a bunch of different languages for how to learn and then XYZ language. And so you can get we got some great information on like the basics of the language, some things to start immersing in for 4, 8, 12, 16, 19 different languages. So if you go to refold.la/get started, that is a way that you can also just like here are the languages, try with some basic content. We've done Clayton was the one who mostly did the curation for these, and so like we've chosen what content to show there. And so finding something like that where you can get an exposure to a bunch of those different languages in like 1 a day, 2 a day is a great way just to get that to start touching languages and see which one like piques your interest the most. You could also try Memrise. I'm sure Busuu has a bunch of languages. A lot of those apps, like Ethan said, are a great way to just touch the languages and see what you like.
But yeah, it's a personal decision, and no one's going to know. You're not going to know until you go and try a bunch of them and see what appeals to you.
The other thing that I would say is that I highly recommend, especially if you want to do many languages, start with one that is more closely related to English. Because if you're new to immersion learning, you have to both learn the language and learn how to learn languages, how to set up your immersion process, how to set up what you like, those sorts of things. And so jumping into a language that has more things in common with English is very helpful to like allow you to also build your personal learning system and how you learn without just getting also bogged down by Arabic. I don't know what's difficult in Arabic, about like difficult languages. And so if you do start with Swedish, which is quite related to English, you're going to have a lot easier of a time picking up on language aspects that allow you to focus more time on how to learn better. And then once you have learned Swedish for as long as that you're interested in it, then you can jump into the harder languages. Just because you already have that foundation of understanding how you learn languages before jumping into something a lot more confusing, I think is because they're not strictly harder, they're just way more different. And there's less stuff in common, so they end up being a lot weirder to learn. And so when you're not also struggling with that, it's really nice.
Yeah.
Anything else to add there?
No.
Well, thank you for the question, Lexa. Got time for a couple more questions. Let's go back to the pre-made questions that people asked. Well, here's one. Should I pause my audiobook? Should I be pausing my audiobook more often when I hear words that I understand? I'm now starting my first novel at a roughly JLPT N3 or 2 learner, and finally accepting that I'll never be fully prepared and that I just need to dive into it. I've been listening to the audiobook as well as reading on my Kindle, and have been really enjoying the process, and I feel like I'm starting to enjoy the story and visualizing in my head what's happening instead of just blankly staring at the words that I don't know. The question I have though is this. Is there any real benefit to just allowing myself to breeze through the story with my comprehension being close to 75% or so? Or should I pause when I come across a common word and look it up as if I were intensively reading?
I mean, it sounds like they are reading and listening to this content.
Mm-hmm. It does.
Yeah, so I don't think you need to do lookups in both of those. If you are enjoying just free flow listening and not trying to, grasp everything that you don't know, then just enjoy that. Because you're using the same piece of content, you've essentially got 4 different activities you can do. You can do free flow reading, free flow listening, intensive listening. So if you have the tolerance for this, I would generally recommend doing multi-pass. So doing all 4 of those in some capacity with the content. Sometimes with like maybe the same chapter or maybe with different chapters, you have different bookmarks. So like I've done this with TV shows where I've done I've done intensive reading first, sentence mining, review, and then free flow listening to give me another pass on it. And then coming back, a year later and re-listening or rereading. But I don't think you need to feel pressure to always be doing intensive when you are using the piece of content. If you're already doing intensive reading, you don't also need to be doing intensive listening because you're going to look up those words anyway.
Especially if you're understanding a decent chunk.
Yeah.
Right? Understanding around 80% is really quite good for free flow. In a recent video, I sort of gave a thought experiment first thing where it's like, if you can understand 80% of the words that you're hearing in your free flow and could write down 80%, at least 80% of them, that's solid for free flow, right? You're picking up enough stuff without having to do intensive immersion.
Yeah.
If 30 or more percent of the language is like it's blurred out, like it's just fuzzy, like you can't even hear what words they're saying, that's probably something where you can consider looking things up more, trying to hear better, because you can't learn something that is you can't hear. Same thing with the words. If you're understanding less than 60% and you're really struggling to follow along with the story, you also aren't learning that much because you don't really know what's happening and you can't pick up on new words that way. But if you're understanding a solid amount of the story and following along, you are learning things, even if it doesn't feel like you are looking things up. Looking things up doesn't inherently make them more learned or learnable if you are already understanding the context and the words that are being used, for maybe even if it's for the first time.
Unless you want to.
Sure, unless you want
Yeah.
to. Look things up if you want. I don't care.
Cool.
Good question, though. And that was from Ace of Spades. Thank you,
Ace of Spades. Ace of Spades.
All right, let's go. Let's find a question from the chat here. How do you learn? I'm sorry, I don't understand that question. I saw a good question though. Oh, here it is. This is going back to the sort of into that free flow and multi-pass method stuff. I've watched a series in Korean, but when I repeat it, I feel like I already know too much of the plot and I'm not focusing on the language. When's a good time to rewatch the series?
I tend to do yearly on content that I want to repeat. So if I'm in the initial learning phase and I still feel like I'm getting a lot out of it, I'll do it more often. And then I will take a break from it and come back to it after about a year. I think 6 months would be totally fine as well. At some point though, like you do sort of squeeze everything out of it that you can reasonably get for the level that you're currently at. But if you feel like you're not getting anything out of it, may not be the best tool or the best content for you to be using.
I will say though, if it just feels easy, but you're still like picking up words and hearing what's being said, you're not just remembering it, then you're actually probably still learning things, even though you might not feel like you are. It can be a bit of imposter syndrome if you're like, oh, anybody could do this. This is such an easy show. And then you go, wait, that was a 5-minute scene of two people just talking back and forth. Of course, a brand new learner couldn't understand this.
Yeah, I think it's really important to like take notes the first time you watch something. If you're planning to like watch something and then rewatch it in the future or reread it, reconsume it, taking notes of how you feel about it the first time you do it, really useful for looking back and seeing how far you've come. Because when you come back to it and it's super easy, you can remember like, oh, it didn't used to be super easy and now it is.
So sometimes it just doesn't feel like learning because it's kind of easy, but you are actually learning stuff and making progress.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Here's our monthly question from Starmas. Says, when is the Chinese deck coming?
It's literally not even on the to-do list, so we should probably put it on the to-do list first.
People ask it every single time.
I know. People have been talking about it for ages, and we always thought, oh, no, the community's got it covered. It's fine. But no, people want it, so maybe that's one of the next decks that we should be doing in 2025. We just have to find somebody to work on it.
We did, for the minimal pairs deck, we did find somebody at the end of the search.
Well, I think there's having like a native speaker is really important, but then someone who's actually going to do all the content curation in the way that we want. Like we don't currently have somebody on staff that could do that. We need to find somebody in the community, though there are plenty of good Chinese learners in the community. So
yeah,
sure, we could recruit somebody. Yeah.
Chinese learners do tend to skew a bit more techie,
and I would also say detail oriented.
Yeah. We've got another question here in the chat. Very quick one. Is it a good idea to mix vocab learning with comprehensible input? Yes.
Yeah, I don't really understand the question. Comprehensible input is a form of vocab learning.
Yeah, I mean they probably mean like Anki, like specific priming.
Yes.
Yes.
You should be doing both of them.
The core of how we recommend you start learning a language is to, and this actually goes back to a conversation, which wasn't really a question, but about how Paulo and Dreaming Spanish don't recommend flashcards.
Mm-hmm.
But this act of like pre-learning vocab and then going out and finding it in comprehensible input just is so powerful for picking up on things more quickly and understanding more concretely. What I see is a little bit of like extreme claims of don't even think about grammar, don't even think about learning words, doesn't seem to produce the results that they say, and doesn't seem to make things go faster or even be more fun for most people. If you really hate all of that, you can just watch comprehensible input all day, sure. But also, most people really hate doing that. And so this extra layer of knowing something we see is very, very, very valuable.
Yeah, so I don't think that Dreaming Spanish is wrong. I think if you actually sat down and watched every single one of their videos from beginning to end, you would learn Spanish, and people have done that. It's just that when we talk about this in our Teach Yourself a Language course, there are different types of learners, and learners have different tolerances for ambiguity and simplicity. So some learners are perfectly happy to do super beginner content, and it doesn't bother them at all, as long as they can understand. Other people hate beginner content and are happy to sit with something that they don't understand. And then there's everything in between that. I am personally of the opinion, like, I hate beginner content. So if you ask me to sit and watch like 50 hours of beginner content in a language before I got to anything interesting, I would just turn that off. I would never go through that process. So to skip that, you can use Anki, you can use vocabulary priming to accelerate your ability to engage with high level content. And you can use the techniques that we teach for how to get something out of high level advanced content when you're not ready to immerse with it. So it's when we look. I was going to say, when we look at the problem of like what stops learners from being successful, it really comes down to the type of learner you are. And Dreaming Spanish may be perfect for you personally if you're the type of learner that enjoys going through that extensive process. But if you're the kind of person that like wants fast results, wants to be doing more advanced things immediately, that will not work for you, and you will not do it. So you will not be successful. So a lot of our techniques and our tools are designed around trying to, for lack of a better term, like hack your comprehension so that you can start to do things that are truly outside of your capability level, because that's what's most interesting. That's what's actually going to keep you engaged.
Yeah. I also think the average person, like a regular person, will be more effective with that method, right? Like the people that really love the beginner content are a lot farther and fewer between than people that would get frustrated by watching somebody speak very, very slowly. Just because it's like there was a beginner Dreaming Spanish video that came up the other day, and I have to put it on double speed for it to sound even close to like normal speed for me in Spanish, just because it's like they're speaking so very slowly that I'm like, come on, let's get on with it now, please.
Yeah.
So, like, if you can put up with that, like, then maybe that you might be sort of the target audience. Because like something I just actually noticed now is that they changed their roadmap timing.
Interesting. Okay.
Because I have a screenshot from a couple months ago, and they had a line of saying that you're native like for practical uses of the language between 1,000 and 1,500 hours, like 1,200 hours or so, 1,250 hours.
Yeah.
They've now pushed that line back and changed it to become effective user of the language for all practical purposes. And it's at 1,500 hours rather than a couple hundred hours before that.
Yeah.
And so they're also realizing that this pretty accelerated timeline just doesn't work for most people. Some people really pick up things very easily and well from the comprehensible input stuff and will become very impressive after 800 hours. Some need more active study, some need more pushing and other things to become an effective user of the language. And so, yeah, that was not a great end to my thought, but hopefully
okay.
it makes sense. I ran out of breath. Anywho,
Yeah.
so that's our time.
Cool.
Thank you for being here, everybody. Sorry if we didn't get to any of your questions, but definitely go into the Refold Discord server and post them. There's a Q&A place. And if you're here, remember that I don't remember, but if you weren't here at the beginning, we mentioned that the Refold app is actually now downloadable, publicly downloadable. It's not quite on the App Store, but you can get it by clicking on the link that I just put in the YouTube chat, or by going here. And you can try the app out today, start tracking, see what other people are doing.
It is definitely still in beta, so there are many places to give feedback. There's a little feedback button on basically every page. So definitely send that in. We monitor it and collect it and prioritize. So, and then there's also a channel in the Discord
server,
so that you can talk about that and ask questions or provide feedback. There's a lot of stuff that we need to build. So we're still working on it, still improving. I'm going to be very excited to see where it ends up in the next year.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for being here. Thank you very much, Ethan, for answering questions, taking time out of your East Coast afternoon, and we'll see you all next time.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Okay. We did the thing.
Nice. Well done.
I think it went fine. I like Riverside. Boy, I am